All right, let's talk about one of the most famous fairy tales of all time. Not for the glass slippers or the pumpkin carriage, but for this powerful psychological script that can write in our heads as adults. Yeah, today we are dismantling the myth of being rescued.
So, I'm going to start with a pretty direct question, just for you to think about. Is there some tiny part of you that's still waiting for a prince? I know, it sounds a little silly, right? But you'd be surprised how that childhood fantasy can kind of stick around, shaping our expectations in the real world. Now, the source material we're looking at today gives this whole pattern a name, the Cinderella delusion. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's this mindset where you're subconsciously waiting for a partner to show up and, just rescue you into this perfect life, instead of you being the one to actually build that life for yourself. So you might be wondering, where does an idea like this even come from? Well, it usually starts way, way back in childhood, with something the source calls princess programming. This quote just hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? The fairy tale doesn't teach you how to build a kingdom. It teaches you how to wait for the king. I mean, think about it. These stories we grow up with, they aren't exactly lessons in leadership or how to be self-sufficient. Nope. They're basically masterclasses in being passive. They teach you how to be chosen, not how to choose.
And the way this programming works is actually super simple. First, you just absorb the stories as a kid. Then you start to internalize the main message, right? That a rescuer is on their way. And before you know it, that becomes this unconscious life strategy, where you're just kind of waiting for the main character to arrive, so your real life can finally start.
So what happens when this programming follows you into adulthood? Well, it has some really serious consequences for how you spend your time and your energy. It creates this dynamic where you're focusing way more on presentation than on your own personal development. And this chart really lays it all out. On the one hand, you've got the fairy tale focus, which is all about attracting a rescuer. Cultivating this passive vibe, investing in your appearance. But look at the other side. All that same energy could have been poured into building a career, learning new skills, or gaining real, true independence. It's a huge conflict in where you put your most valuable resource, your time.
And at the end of the day, this delusion really nurtures one core belief, that your life is basically on pause. The thought process is something like, okay, my story hasn't really started yet. I'm just a side character, waiting in the wings for the hero to show up and get the plot moving. Okay, now this is the part where that fairy tale logic just smacks right into cold, hard reality. See, this whole strategy of waiting, it relies on a type of currency that the source calls a depreciating asset. So what does that even mean, a depreciating asset? Well, in this fairy tale model, the main currency you're trading on to attract that rescuer is often youth and beauty. And here's the problem. Unlike skills or wisdom or experience which grow over time, this currency has a shelf life. And that creates this unspoken and frankly super stressful deadline. And that deadline, well, it creates a pretty predictable timeline. In your 20s, you feel like you're at your peak value within this model. But then you hit your 30s, and if it hasn't happened yet, the pressure really starts to build. By the time you're in your 40s, if that rescue never came, it can lead to what the source describes as a psychological crash.
In that crash, it looks a lot like this. We're talking about really high anxiety, a sense of panic, as that window feels like it's closing. You start questioning every choice you've ever made, and you get this profound, painful feeling of being left behind by everyone who was busy building their own kingdom all along.
But listen, this is not a dead end. This whole story can be flipped on its head. The goal here isn't to just give up, it's to move beyond the delusion. And this right here, this is the most important takeaway from this whole thing. The solution is not to just try harder to find a better rescuer. No, the real pivot, the game changer, is a total shift in your identity. It's that powerful, deep realization that you are the protagonist of your story. You always have been. So let's just wrap this up with the key takeaways. First, just recognize the programming. See how it might be pulling the strings behind the scenes. Second, you have to actively shift your focus away from just presentation and onto your own personal growth. And finally, you dismantle that myth of rescue piece by piece by building a life that you are proud of. Essentially, you become your own rescuer.
And that really brings us to our final thought. For anyone out there who's ever felt like they were just waiting for their life to start, we'll leave you with this question. What if you are the one you've been waiting